title fights to go through. So many big fights. And the next one, we know them both incredibly well. You've obviously fought and beat one of them. And the other one has been the only man or the first man to win all the belts from novice, regional, national and British in the competition. And I'm talking about Dexter Haughton, who he is fighting a massive rematch against his old rival, Seb Hallett. It's a fight that, you know, both of them didn't think would happen on this show, but for reasons, you know, that have sort of brought them together, the fight is on. They're fighting for the vacant British lightweight title. And like I say, we've seen them both in the competition many, many times. You know Seb, you fought Seb, you've beaten Seb. And I've got to say, again, this fight wasn't on the radar, but when it was made and when I revisited their first fight, which happened at the start of the 2022 season, I've got to say, I'm really, really excited for this one.
Yeah, I can't wait for this one. Obviously, I make no secret of it. I'm a good friend of Seb's. I usually do his corners sometimes on the night with Arthur James and with his other coach, Mark. And I was actually in the corner for this first fight. And Seb's a fighter that, throughout his time on the league, has just come on leaps and bounds. Like, you know, you made the point there of saying that I've beat him. That's many, many moons ago, mate. Seb Pre, give me a good old pasting if we fought now. So the trajectory of Seb Hallett's career has just been phenomenal, really. And it's crazy, isn't it? Because I always knew, like, he was very committed, very game and stuff like that. But I'll be completely honest, and I'd say this to Seb, like, if when I fought him, you had said to me, this fella's going to go on to become one of the biggest names in the competition, and also, not only that, one of the most dangerous fighters in the competition, because one thing that has sort of evolved with Seb's game is his ability to punch. Mm-hmm. Like, we've seen him with a couple of absolute highlight reel knockouts now, and knockdowns. And obviously, I know from a personal standpoint how much this fight means to Seb. It was the first fight. It was a brilliant fight, wasn't it? Obviously, Dexter Haughton came out really, really strong. Dropped Seb Hallett in the first round. Now,
first 20 seconds.
Yeah, and I would say that was a flash knockdown. And I'm not discrediting Dexter Haughton, because Dexter Haughton can punch. My God, like
he's another one that he carries dynamite in his hands, and even his sparring partners, the guys who are in the gym who are completely different weight classes to him, you know, like sort of 2, 3, 4 stone heavier than him. All of them say when Dexter hits you, it's different. Yeah. It just kind of goes through you. Funny
little story, right? I don't know if you remember this. I used to help you out sometimes at the sparring trials, and I was sitting, and we were in the old light to box gym. Sunday morning, I'd sort of finished up my training, and I said to you I'd stick around and help you with the sparring trials. And when I say help you, I don't mean sparring myself, almost just like doing a little bit of judging of it for you. And there were some good fighters that sparred that day. A lot of fighters that probably went on to make their debuts on formerly the Queensberry League not long after that. But there was a standout that day, and that was Dexter Haughton. And that was when he had his first sparring trial. He had never fought on your shows before. And he came down. And I remember thinking, this kid is good. Like, I remember watching him and thinking, mate, he's sort of a level above everyone else at this sparring trial. So I'm guessing he had fights before. But yeah, obviously then going on to the league, me and Dexter shared a mutual opponent in Charlie Martin. And he's been boxing on the league, and especially on your shows, for a long, long time now. The same that I was, and the same that Seb. So he's sort of one of the more established fighters on there, someone that's come up, and like you said, he's won everything that's been put in front of him, more or less, in terms of picking up titles and things like that. And obviously, stylistically, you look at this fight, and I think we sort of know what we're going to get from it. And again, it can seem like a lazy analogy, but this one again is sort of boxer versus puncher. On the outset, that's how it looks. But actually, if you know the two fighters like I do, you sort of see there's a lot more layers to it. You know, Dexter Haughton has got a really good jab. Seb Hallett is very bouncy on his feet and able to get in and out of range. Both men hold real power. I know Dexter's probably more known for his power, but both men hold power. And I know for a fact that Seb knows, knows how hard Dexter can punch. And I would imagine that Dexter knows the same about Seb. So I think stylistically, it's just going to be a mouth-watering clash, really, isn't it? And I'm very glad for both men that they've had the opportunity to do this again. And obviously, because they're both coming off of a loss, both, do you know what? I'd go as far to say both shock losses as well, really. Both fights that I didn't think they were going to be beaten in. Obviously, Dexter lost on the York Hall, Bethnal Green show.
He did, to Sammy Algiers. And to be honest with you, it was a loss that, and this is not coming from Dexter Haughton as in an excuse or anything like that. I chatted to him. In the build-up to that fight, I knew that he'd had issues with his training camp. I knew that he had to go to Jamaica for a funeral, which interrupted his camp. And, I've been talking to him and I was sort of saying, how's your camp going? And he was like, yeah, camp's okay. It's not great, but, I've got enough. I'm feeling like I'll be okay. So, there were never kind of any excuses. And even after the fight, when I was chatting to him, I mean, for those that haven't seen it, Haughton was defending his British lightweight title against Sammy Algiers. Algiers was coming into that fight off a great win earlier in the season. He was an experienced sort of fighter, not maybe so much in boxing, but in K1. He was a very, very sort of accomplished fighter. And Haughton didn't look himself from the opening bell, but with Dexter, he has got that power. He had Algiers down a couple of times in the fight. It looked like, he was gonna have enough in the tank to win the fight. And then Algiers, to his credit, got back off the canvas, turned the fight around, flipped the script, and ended up stopping Dexter Haughton to become champion. And the only reason that the title was vacated is that Algiers has sort of gone back to K1, and he was sort of, he wasn't going to be able to defend the belt. So it freed the title up, and both, Dexter and Seb were the next logical, Dexter being the former champion. Both of them coming into this fight, both Dexter Haughton and Seb Hallett were both chasing different rematches for different reasons. Obviously, Haughton wanted the Algiers fight, wanted to right the wrongs, but that wasn't the Dexter Haughton that we'd seen before. The one that had fought the likes of Sean Haylock in an absolute barnstormer of a fight on season 1, who'd beaten the likes of Ollie Stone, who'd obviously beaten Seb Hallett earlier on in season 2. It wasn't really his best performance. And I think, talking to him, I interviewed him recently and I said, in my opinion, you probably came into that fight thinking, do you know what? It's been a terrible camp, but I'll still have enough to get by. I'll still have the power. I'll still have what it's going to take to win this fight. It won't sometimes, I'm going to have to dig a bit deeper, but I still had enough. But what he found out on that night was, at that level, he isn't going to have enough if he's not in the best shape that he can be. And my point to this is, coming into this fight, I spoke to him and I said, how's training been for this one? He said, training has been perfect. He said, we've still got 3-4 weeks to go. Training is on point. I'm feeling fit. I'm feeling strong. And you're going to see a totally different fighter. I've got a point to prove. And this wasn't a fight against Hallett that I was on my radar. But now that the fight is made, now that I know, I'm really looking forward to this. And you're going to see a different person. And I'm coming for the stoppage. I'm coming for the knockout. And equally for Seb Hallett, he was chasing the rematch with Salah Triple M Busick, who's gone back down to super featherweight. And I know that for a long time, Seb Hallett wanted this rematch with Dexter. The first fight, I watched that fight again, and it's funny how you remember things slightly differently, but when I watched that fight back, they talk about nothing to do with boxing, but first impressions count. So coming into that fight, like I said, in the first round, first 20 seconds, Seb Hallett got caught, and it was a flash knockdown. It wasn't like concussed where he struggled to get back to his feet and he looked dazed and confused. He got caught early, but I think that first impression with the judges was a massive factor in Dexter Haughton winning that fight, because when you then go on to watch the fight, obviously it's a big first round for Dexter Haughton. So as a judge, as a fan, you're looking at going, big round for Dexter Haughton. The next round, Seb boxed really well, like you say, bouncy, up on his toes, flicking the jab out, lovely movement. Dexter was sort of trying to land those big shots. Third round, again, good movement from Seb Hallett. Dexter had his sort of successes, but Seb was boxing nicely. And then in the fourth round, Seb got caught with a couple of big shots that really rocked his head back, and he sort of went back to the ropes, and Dexter was unloading and sort of, and I think because of that knockdown, people watching that fight were constantly thinking about that knockdown, the early knockdown, and it was almost like too big a mountain to climb unless Seb Hallett had sort of maybe put a big dent in Dexter Haughton and sort of maybe sort of put him down to kind of equal the score. So Dexter won on points, and it was an unbelievably close fight. But yeah, I think this one, like you say, they're both coming into this off the back of a loss, but since that first meeting, like you say, Seb Hallett, he's gone on, he's won the regional and he's won the national title. You know, a fantastic performance against Nicky Slatcher, the highlight reel knockout against Stephen Donnelly at the K2 in Crawley, which was, you know, arguably one of the most brutal knockouts I've ever seen, not only in Quest, but in any event I've ever promoted. Yeah. You know, that was, you know, one of those ones where you look at it and go, that was a sickener. That was a genuine lights out moment where he stopped and he's sort of shown that power. I know Dexter Haughton has said, you know, those fighters are not Dexter Haughton, you know, Stephen Donnelly, Nicky Slatcher, the ones that Seb Hallett has beaten, they're not on my level. So comparing those sort of finishes, yeah, they're good, they look great, but they're not me. I'm a totally different fighter. And I know that Seb Hallett's coming into this fight, you know, if Seb Hallett beats Dexter Haughton, he's instantly the new number one in the division. You know, he's the man to beat. The stakes are high. And for Dexter, you know, he gets back onto the top and all he wants to do is fight the best. So it's actually, there's a lot at stake in this, because for one of them, they're going to be the number one, the person to beat in the division, the British champion. And for the loser, that's back-to-back losses. You know, you kind of got to ask yourself, you know, not that it's the end, but you would be looking at that thinking, I can't come away with another loss. You know, I can't. It's, even though it's a big fight and there's still plenty of fights out there, I can't sort of lose this one. So, I mean, break it down from your perspective. We know it's going to be a good fight, but how is this fight won and lost?
I think, like, from Seb's point of view, when we talk about the possibility of taking a loss, Seb's been there and done it when it comes to coming back from adversity, coming back from sort of defeats when he would have been expecting to maybe win certain fights and whatnot, obviously early on in his career. One thing with Seb is Seb's had it the hard way, the whole way round. Like, Seb came in almost as the opponent, didn't he? Like, the first 2-3 matches that I saw him in fights on the Queensberry, I'm not saying he was fed to the wolves or anything, but like, he fought me. I was like, obviously a very, very sort of confident fighter around that time. He fought me in my hometown. I think he would have sold about 20 tickets or something for that fight, which is mad when you look at the amount of tickets he sells now, because he's obviously built his name as such a good fighter, and obviously because he's such a lovely person. Like, he manages to sell a lot more tickets now. I think when he fought me, he probably sold 20, 30 tickets, whereas I'd probably sold 100 or something. And it was in my hometown, literally a stone's throw from where I lived at the time. So in that fight, you know, he was almost going into the Lion's Den and he had a lot going against him. Then he fought Huss, who was obviously before that a really good amateur, a lot more experienced than Seb, and obviously Seb put up a good fight in that one. And then he started to build and find himself on the league and come into his own. But as I say, he's always took hard fights. The Darryl Goddard fight, which is a fight that I still say to this day, I do believe that Seb won. Obviously, the Liam Finley fight, which is a fight that Seb lost, and I went on to fight Liam. And again, that was another boy that had come out of the amateurs and had been a real tough opponent. So actually, when I look at the fights they've had, Seb's fought, definitely when it comes to the depth and the amount of them, Seb's fought the tougher opponents out of him and Dexter. But what I would say is obviously Dexter, again, like, I can't put enough praise on Dexter. I think he's a brilliant boxer. I think he's really good. And I do think that sort of loss at the York Hall show was probably somewhat of a flash in the pan for Dexter. Like you say, camp didn't go well. I've had camps that don't go well. I know how hard it can be, and obviously if there was a family bereavement or something like that, obviously you know, condolences to him, and I understand that must be something that's really hard. So I think that the good thing about this fight is you've got two quality boxers. And I'm not saying that for the sake of saying it. You have Seb Hallett is a brilliant boxer. Dexter Haughton, a really good boxer. And both of them have that excitement knowing that they do hold the power to end a shot at any minute. And that's a key thing in this lightweight division, you know. Like, I campaigned at lightweight. I used to win fights, but I never stopped no one. I was never even dropping no one. You know what I mean? And I used to think of...
That's because you couldn't punch.
No, I couldn't, not out of paper bag. But no, like, and that's what I mean. Like, in the gym, I would think, I can punch a little bit. It's a different thing on the night in those 10-ounce gloves. So I've got the utmost respect for both Dexter and obviously Seb in the performances they've shown and being able to stop people. In terms of how I sort of said at first, almost like the boxer versus the puncher here, I wouldn't necessarily go along with it too much when it comes to how these two are going to match up, because I think both men can box. I think both men can punch. I think Seb Hallett has the edge when it comes to footwork over Dexter Haughton, because I think that Seb is the fighter that's able to shift in and out of range with a little bit more of like what we'd associate with the amateur style of movement rather than Dexter Haughton. But Dexter Haughton has got that toughness, that grit, the punch power, obviously, that we spoke about, and he'll be massively determined to win this fight, having come off the back of a loss. Now, a loss for Dexter is a little bit more maybe alien than it is a loss for Seb, because Seb's took losses. Seb's probably took a handful of losses in the competition, whereas Dexter, I can only remember he lost against Charlie Martin early on.
So going back, we're going back a few years. I think he lost to Aaron Thomas.
Yeah, that was it. Yeah,
at Troxy early on, and obviously but from sort of a Quest perspective, from his Quest career, as I say, the Algiers fight was the one that sort of is really. I mean, he's sort of everyone else he's beaten.
Yeah.
And he's gone through the division. So yeah, but it's a good point. I mean, like you say, Seb Hallett on his resume has fought some very, very good fighters. And the problem with the way that Quest and before Queensberry were matched is that it's all based on, like 50-50 fights. If you were talking about a young prospect in the professional ranks, and you know exactly how it works, and this is not a criticism, it's just how it works. The prospect will fight the opponents to build up their experience, and they might not reach the kind of 50-50 fight real pick'em fights until they've had maybe sort of between 8, 10, 12 fights. Whereas as soon as you come into the Quest competition, you're fighting opponents who, they might have had more fights on paper, but they're still, in terms of ability, it's 50-50 or, 60-40. It just depends, who's available, the weight side of things. But, that's why a loss doesn't mean anything in the competition. And I say that to boxers time and time again. It's just like they've come into the competition, they might have had a loss, and it's just like it doesn't matter. The league is about putting the best with the best. You work your way up and down the rankings. A loss isn't catastrophic. You can bounce back, and there's been plenty of fighters who have come in and experienced loss and then gone on to win titles and become sort of one of the best in the division. So I think, like I say, it's both of them are going to want to win. Both of them are hungry. And like you say, it's interesting when you bring up the point about, Seb has shown power in his sort of in his previous fights against Donnelly and Nicky Slatcher. We know Dexter can punch. And I think for this fight, when I'm looking at it, I know that Dexter wants to make a statement. I know Dexter wants to come in here on that fight. And, he said, it's not going to go to the judges. I want to I'm going for the stoppage. And equally, me personally, I think Seb has to do what he did in rounds 2, 3, and the first part of 4. Be on his toes, box and move, and not even look for, the power punches. Just look to frustrate, to outbox, to move, and not get himself into that position where Dexter maneuvers him to a place where he can unload those power shots. And if Dexter's at the right range and Seb's at the end of those shots and he lands, then, Dexter has shown he's got the power. And equally, even though it was kind of like, we've talked about the problems in the training camp, if Seb catches Dexter, that'll be interesting, because as a fighter, as much as you want to be confident, as much as you believe in your own ability, the brain will tell you if you've had to, if you've been knocked out or if you've been stopped in a fight or, you've taken big punches, the brain will remember that. And sometimes your punch resistance can go just from that one sort of, flash knockdown or that stoppage where all of a sudden the brain remembers it. And before you know it, you're like, I used to walk through those shots. I used to eat those shots. Those shots would have bounced off me. But it's going to be interesting, like I say, because they're both coming in with a lot to prove, a lot on the line. But like we've said, both coming in off of losses. So, intriguing. Can I say a prediction? I think if Seb Hallett sort of boxes to his best ability, he can win this. But equally, I think, not sitting on the fence, which I'm going to do. I think if Dexter can box, show that aggression, be relentless and not give Seb an opportunity to box, I think he's obviously shown in all his other fights, except for the Algiers, that, he'll grind you down, he'll work you, he'll find a way to win. So, yeah, it's a cracking fight.